Hello, everyone. I'm ZHAO Chuang. Let's draw the hind limb of Microraptor today. A very unusual feature of Microraptor was that its hind limbs were also wings. This was an intermediate feature during the evolution of dinosaurs to birds, which was very peculiar. However, there were both similarities and differences between the feathers on the hind limbs and the forelimbs. First, they were similar in shape, with the outermost section forming a rhombus, and the longest ended here. Like the forelimbs, its hind wings also had both primaries and secondaries. We know that its front wing was composed of primaries and secondaries, the feathers on the hands and the feathers on the arms, so its hind limbs were the same. However, they were not called primaries and secondaries as these feathers were on the feet and shanks, and the ones on the thighs were not useful in flight. Therefore, when drawing, we should pay attention to distinguishing the two parts. Next, let's draw its one hind limb. When drawing it, we should first determine the inside bone structure, such as the sizes of the thigh and the shank. Its shanks were much longer than its thighs. Then the length of the sole, that is, the length of the metatarsal bones, and then its toes. Like many dromaeosaurids, its feet had 4 toes. Among them, 3 were longer functional toes. Its toes were completely exposed, so we can draw these 3 toes first. The first toe had a slightly larger claw, but it wasn't as large as those of Deinonychus or Velociraptor. It was a bit bigger than the other 2. The other toe was probably here, and was blocked, so leave some room here. Next, we draw the feathers on its hind limbs. The peculiarity of Microraptor was that its hind limbs were wings made of feathers. This feather grew from the side of the foot. In the beginning, the feathers were short, then they became longer and longer. Like the wings of the forelimbs, the outer feathers overlapped on top of the ones inside. This feather at the ankle was the longest. Next, the feathers on the shanks got very short, and there were no flight feathers on the thighs. And they turned into long and thin feathers similar to fine hair. Then, we draw the covered feathers on its hind limbs. Like its forelimbs, it also had covered feathers on its hind limbs. There might be 3 to 4 layers of covered feathers, and we use the dotted line to outline them. Then, we outline the front end of its legs. What comes first was its thigh, which grew like this. The membrane on the thigh was linked to the trunk, so we draw its shape like this. This was its belly. Some membranes extended like this. And then its knee. It had very thick feathers between its thighs and shanks, and a membrane-like structure like that of wings, so the transition was smoother, not angled like many animals. Its feet were exposed like this. Next, we draw the gaps between the longest flight feathers, with the rear ones overlapping the front ones. Draw each feather clearly. Then, we draw its rachises. Like the rachises of the forelimbs, the outer rachises were slanted and asymmetrical. Now they look symmetrical because part of the feather was covered by another one. Then we move on to the shank. Next, we show the feathers on the rest of the leg. In the corner, we can draw these feathers to show the volume of the shaded parts under the light, including the feathers on its belly. Slightly draw some gaps on these coverts. And then its ischium and tail. In the end, we draw some large scales on the back of its claws. Good, like this, we've finished drawing this hind limb of Microraptor.